And I figured if I could sit in a room and have 20-year-old people sit there and critique my work, and I could take it. And if they found anything of interest, in a memoir written from the perspective of a privileged middle-aged widow, that, I might have a chance.
Welcome to the Crossing It Off podcast, where we believe living with intention through a bucket list lifestyle is a great way to bring yourself personal joy. As you are crossing items off your list, you're actually filling up your bucket. The more items you cross off, the more joy gets added, until eventually your joy spills over into the lives of those around you. Now let's start crossing it off together. How important for your bucket list or your life is it that you set an intention? Today's bucket list storyteller experienced profound loss and found herself questioning who she was and where she fit in the world. But after setting an intention, she didn't just cross one item off, she crossed off lots. She found her why and she put it to good use. Let's hear how she did it and start crossing it off. This time I want to introduce my bucket list storyteller, Debbie Weiss, and she describes herself as an author, a widow, and a former lawyer. Debbie, thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me, Roger.
Yeah. So my interest in telling your story is that it's not necessarily one item that you've crossed off, but we're really going to talk about the intention that you had behind doing these things. So what was that intention that you set up to accomplish when you decided, hey, I'm going to start living a life that's a little bit different?
Well, my goal was to create a new life and find joy after my husband of 32 years died in 2013.
Is a tall task, I'm sure. And I'm sorry for your loss. And but at the same time, I'm also glad that you're looking at life through a different lens. So tell us, how did this all come to be? Where were you in the process when you decided, oh, I need to take a hold of my life and go find myself joy?
Well, I married my high school sweetheart. We were together for 32 years. So I knew him since I was 7. Our parents worked together and he was 11. And everything was fine. I became a lawyer. He was an engineer. And then in 2009, he was diagnosed with cancer. And we had a few good years, but he passed in 2013. And I was alone. We don't have children. And we had very isolated lives. I'm an introverted bookworm. At that point, I'd retired from practicing law about 9 years prior as an insurance coverage lawyer. And I could just go days just alone. And I didn't really know how to live a life that wasn't sort of a shadow of my married life.
What happened that you finally stood up and said, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to find something new. I want to find myself. What was the catalyst that prompted you to move in that direction?
Well, it's probably about 4 months after he'd passed, and I'd straightened out all the finances, and we had a lot of deferred maintenance to our home, and that was going well. I looked pretty healthy from the outside. I walked a lot by myself. I joined a gym. I was at a gym. But again, I was so alone. And in the evening, I would sort of fall apart. It was a small home, but when you're in it alone after a long marriage, the walls feel oddly claustrophobic. It's surprisingly quiet. So I would spend a lot of my evenings listening. My late husband was George, to George's favorite albums and drinking Manhattans. And, in the morning I was a bit hungover, and then I'd get on with my day. And I realized I couldn't spend the rest of my life this alone. I was going to have to do something.
Did you seek out support in that process, or was this just Debbie saying, I gotta do this on my own, I'm gonna grit my teeth and go out and do it? Or did you have family and friends that were saying, yeah, get out there, or no, it's too early? Or what was the reaction of the people around you?
Well, that was one of the problems. I didn't have a lot of people around me. I'm an only child. George was an only child. My father's an only child. When George passed, there was his parents, and that was a little tricky. I won't go into all that. But he'd been in denial when he passed, so his parents weren't very happy with the way his death had handled. He'd excluded them. And my father and my stepmother were having health problems. So I could go see them, but they couldn't be real proactive. Again, no kids. No close friends. I mean, this was really bad. There weren't people around me. That was kind of the problem. One thing that really did help me was that I had an excellent grief therapist
Mhm.
And she was very proactive. I remember her saying, go do something. And she would give me a chore. She would say, 1 week, join a group. Another week, she'd say, you have to, when you go to your yoga class, you have to tell one person you're a widow.
Mm.
She'd say, okay, think about one social activity you would try. And so that was extremely helpful. But I just kind of picked up on my own. I was in kind of a limited suburban community, and I just started joining a bunch of groups.
And so what of that stuck that you said, let's get to the things that you started doing. What were some of those things that really caught you in that process of kind of starting to reach out that you said, okay, I'm going to move in this direction?
Well, I joined my local Rotary Club,
Mm.
and I don't know that Rotary was really for me, but it was a very nice group of service-oriented individuals. And one night a week, we all went for dinner. So that meant I was putting on something besides sweatpants, not drinking, and going and meeting new people. And my late husband had a sports car. I planned to sell it, but the sports car guy, the president of that sports car club, who I talked to about selling it, was so nice. And he said, "Oh, we do weekly breakfast. We have all these events." I thought, okay, I'm not much of a driver, but I can do this. So I joined the car club, and they met for Saturday breakfasts. And usually there would be an activity after that. And, again, coupes versus cabriolets isn't my biggest strong point. But again, super nice people. I joined a yoga studio, and there was a group of women, really friendly. The teachers were really nice. So that was kind of another community. There's yoga retreats, you start to get to know people. And then I also picked up a writing class that I'd been taking before George got sick.
Mm.
And again, that was amazing because it gave me a purpose. I had things to write. And a few of the more intense people in the class, there's another fellow lawyer. So I guess he recognized a fellow, maybe type A person, invited me to join their writing group. So 2 days a week, I had people to sit with and writing to critique. And all that was extremely helpful, and I realized I actually enjoy talking to people, and this wasn't really that scary.
And through taking up that class, you decided that you were going to do what?
I decided that I was going to write a book.
Okay.
And on the way to doing that, I decided other things. I started blogging, which was interesting. It's kind of a virtual life. I decided to start sending out my writing to be published. So I did that. I was in some women's magazines, and I was a Huffington Post blogger.
Nice.
And that was very helpful. I worked part-time at a bookstore, which was not a success. I think their inventory is probably still messed up from my trying to be on the computer. But I tried. And, from there, I got into more intense classes and working on a book.
And you eventually, did you not get an MFA?
I did. Thank you for
Okay.
asking. That's what I'm proudest of. I was writing my book, and I felt like it wasn't going as far as it should. And again, it's hard to work in a vacuum as a writer. You sit there and you look at the same words, but it's still your opinion. It's you in a room.
Right.
So I went back to, I live in Northern California. I went to St. Mary's College of California in Moraga, actually. And I went back with the kids, and I earned an MFA in creative writing in 2020. And I was 56.
Do you think that was a big departure from who you were before, or is that something that you'd always wanted to do, or how did that decision come about? Say, okay, well, I'm here, I might as well get this other master's.
Well, I really wanted to work on my book, and I wanted to work on it in an intense environment. In an MFA, you have a thesis, and the thesis is usually a book that you're writing. And a lot of the MFA process is workshopping. And I figured if I could sit in a room and have 20-year-old people sit there and critique my work, and I could take it, and if they found anything of interest, in a memoir written from the perspective of a privileged middle-aged widow, that, I might have a chance. So I decided to do it. I was kind of leery of it, but it was fantastic because at the same time, I had something published that led to my teaching a writing class in the city. I taught some essay writing classes. I did that for a while, and I hired an editor for my book, and I took it really seriously. And, I made some friends, and it was really fun to be with a different group of people.
Having also gone through that process of going back and getting my bachelor's when I was 40, I understand that the person that's non-traditional sticks out pretty well sometimes when you're sitting in the classroom. How was that for you, going in this experience of finding your new self, was that beneficial to have all these young people running around you and talking to you, or did it make you feel old? I felt old the other day in the airport. Start being a little curmudgeon-y about my surroundings. Did you find yourself there, or was it energetic?
Well, that's a good question. Some of each. They're actually the class ahead of me did have a couple women who were older than I was, probably more like their late 60s, who were getting their thing. And my class actually had a woman a little older than I was. Seems to be a thing we do after our first careers are over. But, I really never felt excluded by the kids. Now, I didn't, I only went to 2 tiki bar karaoke nights. That's not me. But I went to a couple. I do not sing. I really like the people, and I didn't feel terribly out of it. I'm pretty comfy in tennis shoes and a backpack. That was fine. Probably the hardest thing for me is that, I went to law school, but I graduated in 1988 and I was 24, 25. So it was very hard to be like, you have to be here. Your attendance is mandatory. You will
Yes.
turn these things in. It's easy for me to turn in, our thesis had only 70 pages and I had a full book by the time I was finished. But I wasn't very used to having to do something when I don't want to.
Here at the Crossing It Off podcast, we are passionate about inspiring you in your bucket list lifestyle and empowering you to live out your list. We offer many resources to assist you in your bucket list journey, such as web resources in the show notes, bucket list mentoring services, my book Live Out Your Lists, a private Facebook group for you to share your bucket list success stories with others, and more. All of these can be found at crossingitoffpodcast.com. Find the resource that fits your need so that you can live out your list. Now back to the show. Yeah, college has changed a lot over the years, and I freaked out because there was attendance. I'm like, really, attendance?
Yeah, exactly. And it was evening. The class was kind of geared, I think, for kids to be able to work, because it was a graduate program. And at 5 o'clock, I'm kind of in my jammies, and it's time for a glass of wine and into dinner. So evening classes for me were hard. That isn't how I'm more of a morning person.
Yeah.
And it was like, I have to be here after dark. What do you mean? I don't even like to drive after dark, really.
Starting to do all these things and putting a new life together. How was that impactful for you? How did Debbie start seeing the world maybe in a different way than had she before?
There were so many choices. It was almost like graduating from college. But, when I graduated from college, I joke that my generation was very middle-aged. We were the yuppies. So we wanted to get careers. We wanted to buy houses and cars and, have savings. I think that's a really dated perspective. So it was kind of nice to have a lot of that behind me. I volunteered in class. I really didn't care. I've been to law school. I've been put down enough as an attorney. I really didn't care at that point. But what did help me very much was to see that I could do what I wanted. And when I was married, we kind of did what my husband wanted. And I was good with that. He worked extremely hard. I'd retired at 40. I burned out on being a lawyer. But we did what he enjoyed. And he didn't want to travel. He loved cooking. On weekends, we would go to the city and buy ingredients and, for fancy meals. And that's what he liked to do. The kinds of movies he liked. And that was fine. Even our home, we had a pretty elaborate, always in process home theater system. He was an engineer. But what I realized is I didn't know what I liked to do. And so it was kind of being alone, and losing him was devastating. But after a while, it was interesting to be able to think of, gee, what do I want to do?
And how did that process work out? Was it just as simple as asking that question, or were you doing activities to try to figure that out? How did you make that transition?
To be honest, I have anxiety. My mom died when I was 10 after a brief illness, and that was very surprising. So I always stayed close to home. I'm an only child, had to keep an eye on my dad, because you never know when a parent might vanish, So I married my high school sweetheart, became an attorney, and settled into the same hometown. And so when I started to move forward, I took very small steps. It was like, what groups were close to me that I could join? I loved walking. So, okay, well, where are some walking groups? And ultimately that led to becoming a pretty avid hiker. And I joined some groups on Meetup and got a big group of friends from there. And then my weekends got a lot better because I wasn't alone. And, if you're hating Saturday, when you come home after a 7 or 8 mile hike, you're tired, the television doesn't look that bad. And, chatting with friends on the hikes, all that was terrific. So it was really just for me, it was taking small steps forward and then going from there. My writing class was once a week, very near me. And it's an adult education center with a bunch of lovely retired folks. For the most part, I was the youngest person in the class. But then from there, going, okay, doing a writing group. And from there, I actually ventured into San Francisco on our local public transit and saying, okay, I can do these. I can take a workshop class in the city, and then starting to submit and saying, well, I can deal with rejection. That's lawyer. I can do that. And, then from there, writing my book and getting the MFA and hiring an editor and getting it published and out there. So it was really a matter of starting really small as a cautious person and then scaling up.
If somebody else found themselves in the same position you were, that you had lived this one life and now you kind of forced to create a new one, what's like one piece of advice that you would give them, besides just do it, get out there and move on? What would be something that would be helpful for them to be thinking about as they were going to pursue that, building a new life?
Well, two pieces. My first advice is, find out, it's pretty cliche, but find out what you like to do and then figure out how to do it with other people. At another level, I would say don't date too soon.
Okay. And so I have to ask why.
Well, I started dating 14 months after I lost my husband, and that seemed a reasonable amount of time to me. It's over a year. At that point, I was much more put together. I was no longer, on the living room floor with Manhattans and the Rolling Stones. But I was kind of shocked at how terrible dating was in the internet age and online dating. And I think a lot of people, especially women, have said this. And I was kind of shocked at the poor quality of the people I met and the experience and all the myriad unpleasant aspects.
Yeah, I say I dated a lot of online apps.
Yeah.
For a while, because it really was about finding the right app that would produce something, meaningful for me, and where I could be someplace where I would find like-minded people. You get thrown into those pools of just millions of people swiping. It's not necessarily wasn't the best thing for me, for sure. So yeah, I dated a lot of apps before I found the one that produced what I wanted. So
yeah, it took me about 5 years.
Wow. And how's life been with a new partner since you've, lost your first one of many, many years? How has that been a transition for you to, knowing that you need to not be swallowed in by a relationship, but also need to be yourself in it? How have you coped with that and built that into your relationship process?
Well, the 5 years, my partner's name is Randall. The 5 years before I met Randall were hard because I was just shocked by the men I met. I mean, they were cynical. They lived in the past. They seriously had mommy issues. I started on J-Date, and, you'd think J-Date and mommy issues are a cliche, but it exists.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I joke that, when I wrote my book, which is called Available As Is, A Midlife Widow's Search for Love, I wrote it to help other widows to create a new life. It's a memoir, but I joke that I wrote it because to talk about the poor quality of middle-aged men. Finding Randall was great because we moved into things very slowly and he was super supportive. I met him right before I took a trip. I was gone for 3 weeks after we would, gotten together. And then I started my master's degree. So by then I kind of had a life put together, and he was amazingly supportive. And, after 3 years, we moved in together, and I left my house that I lived in for 27 years that I lived in with George, and kind of finally got rid of those pieces that didn't work for me anymore. So it was fantastic. But those first 5 years, I really was looking at, okay, how am I going to enjoy spending the rest of my life as a single person?
Because the prospects were so low. I get it.
Yeah.
I understand. Well, I'm excited that you've taken all these steps and moved forward. What's something else that you would like to add to that list of things that you're doing to find yourself joy?
Oh, well, I'm kind of done promoting my book. It was published. It's out there. As an antidote to book promotion, I'm starting yoga teacher training
Okay.
next month. And I possibly will be writing another book. but not about me. I would be writing it about some other people, and it depends. It's a project that I'm collaborating with somebody on, and we'll see if it works. But it would be very nice not to be inside my own head so much.
Yeah. Was yoga a part of your life before your husband passed, or is that something that you picked up in this process?
Go to 1 or 2 classes a week. I was more of a weights and personal training kind of person.
Hmm.
But after he passed, I really got into yoga. The mental benefits are astonishing. And this is probably cliche, but it does feel more like a way of life, of how you think of things, how you react, even how you breathe. It's definitely good for your posture. And I know when I was going through my loss, evenings, were the hardest time, at least for me as a widowed person, because where's your dinner companion? I missed so much having someone to sit down to dinner with and say, how was your day?
Hmm.
That's not something that's easy to fix. So I was doing evening yoga classes most days of the week. And there was a nice group of, like me, midlife single women, and they were really friendly. And they kind of folded me into their group. I remember the very first Thursday night when someone said, well, we go for drinks after class. You come too.
Hmm.
And from there were yoga retreats and other things. So it was a community for me.
Do you have an attention of what you would like to see happen if you become a yoga instructor? Is there something like you're passionate about to say, I want to go, because teaching, you have to have a why to
Yeah.
teach anything. So what would be that why for you as far as becoming a yoga instructor?
Well, I love teaching writing. That's been super hard to do with the pandemic. So that's difficult. But, and I'm not sure I am going to teach. I'm doing this in part to deepen my own knowledge. And
Oh,
because
there you
there's
go.
a studio in town, I really love the people. And I think it would be neat to learn more about it. But if I did teach, I always joke, I am not naturally role coordinated. I am not the person who can do the inversions and the fancy, like crow to chaturanga to headstand is not me.
Yeah, I have no
So I
idea what
always,
you're talking about.
yeah. So I always joke that I would want to teach yoga for klutzes. And,
Okay.
I'm a little older, so yoga for older people. But I love the idea of combining yoga and writing.
Hmm.
So ultimately that might be something I would do just for fun though. Not promoting it the way I promoted a book. That was painful.
Yeah, it's tough. I know. So, in that, where can people find you? Where can they get more information about you and possibly check out your book?
Well, the best place to find me is my website. Not surprisingly, it's called debbieweissauthor.com. My book is on Amazon and it's readily available to be ordered from your local bookstore. I've had a lot of support from a few local bookstores in my area, so I really think that's important.
Oh, yeah.
You can find me on Facebook. I'm Debbie Weiss. I'm also Debbie Weiss Author. Instagram, Debbie Weiss Author. And I'm never there, but I think I'm D Weiss Writer on TikTok. I tried that too. But if you really want to find me, like I said, the best place is probably at my website and Amazon. My book's there.
Awesome. I appreciate it greatly. You coming and sharing your story and doing it so vulnerably. I appreciate that. I wish you all the best in your instructor classes. Namaste on that.
Thank you.
Regardless of the outcome. And Debbie, thank you just so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Roger. I appreciate it.